This is the world's cheapest 1/10 scale brushless vehicle, and not only did I only pay about $85 for this thing on sale on Amazon, but it came with a 2S LiPo, a LiPo bag, a spare battery strap, a spare set of arms with wheel hexes and tie rods, a spare set of body mounts and gear, a battery charger and battery charger adapter, and a spare body. If you subtract all the extras, this truck itself only cost like 15 bucks. And not only that, but this truck comes with a $30 Hobbywing 10BL50 ESC. Now the question is, even at that price, is this worth it or is it just a piece of junk? That's what we're gonna find out in this video. First of all, I wanna say, I don't hate the way this truck looks. It's a pretty decent looking livery, and it doesn't have a bunch of greebling on it like some cheap trucks do. It's even got a nice big high wheelie bar in the back. It's got oil-filled shocks in the front and rear that actually feel pretty good. The body, while not the highest quality feeling body in the world, is reasonably thick. We've got decent looking oil-filled threaded plastic bodied shocks, a nice center brace, that 50 amp Hobbywing ESC. To go along with that, we've got a 3300 kV brushless motor, metal dog bones in the rear and CVDs in the front. We'll take a closer look at those in a minute. An aluminum center drive shaft connected to a slipper clutch that you can adjust from the outside, a decent looking battery tray, pretty basic looking but adequate full plastic chassis, a pretty tough looking front bumper, as well as a combination wheelie bar back bumper. As we go through this car, it's really important to remember that this is a very cheap car for everything that you get. That doesn't mean we're gonna be easy on this thing though. We're definitely gonna be giving it the full abuse treatment. We've got Starlock washers for the wheel nuts. That's not something I've ever seen before, though the wheel nuts themselves are also Nylock. These tires feel pretty decent. They're actually foam filled. They're vented on the inside, so the tires themselves are not vented. That's something you might want to do if you're going to be running through water. Underneath that, we've got a pretty standard kingpin setup. These are metal hexes, though I'm not really sure what kind of metal. They feel pretty cheap. Whereas these links are not in double shear, it looks like these screws will hold them captive if they come off the balls. We'll have to see just how well those hold up during bashing. These shocks look fairly decent. Let's take a closer look inside. As you can see, these are plastic threaded body shocks. They do have metal adjustment collars. Spring retainers are plastic, and the shafts are pretty darn thin. Taking the cap off, you can see these are bladder style, and they are oil-filled shocks. These actually have more oil in them than some of the shocks I've seen on much more expensive cars. Arms are plastic, and they do have adjustable droop screws, which is really cool. We can see we've got steel output cups on the differentials. Let's take a closer look at those. Laegendary have put little notches in the front bumper that give you a place to put your bit through to unscrew them. That's a nice touch that, again, you don't see with every manufacturer. This bumper does integrate a little skid plate for the front. That should just come right off there. And it appears as though this differential is going to be quick access from the front, which again, you don't get from every brand. Let's see if these are fully plastic hinge pin blocks or if we get some metal inside. No, okay, so these are going to be fully plastic, which of course isn't as strong as ones that have metal inserts, but still for the price, it looks pretty good. And these hinge pins themselves appear to be decently thick. And with those two screws removed, this should come apart. That's an interesting color of grease. And with that, we get our first look at the differential. This was actually pretty easy to get to. I've definitely had cars recently that were far harder to take apart. As we remove some of this interesting grease, we can see we have a metal ring gear. Let's see if it's steel or not. That is a steel ring gear. It's obviously sintered steel, but it is steel, and the teeth look pretty nice on it. We've got a bunch of shims underneath this ball bearing, and I do see an O-ring in there, though I suspect this is going to be grease filled. This is the most shims I've ever seen on a differential. I'll be curious to see how good the mesh is and whether or not these shims were actually necessary. Okay, we've got some self-tappers here, which is kind of an interesting change from the rest of the screws. There isn't necessarily anything wrong with that, and at least they are hex head. Keeping in mind, of course, that this is the cheapest 1/10 scale brushless car I could find. Opening this up, we've got more of the same grease. There is no gasket here, so this isn't a sealed differential. And it does look like these are also sintered gears, and there are only 2 spider gears in here, so this isn't going to be the strongest differential in the world. Will it be strong enough to handle 3S? I guess we're just going to have to find out. Overall, we've got an all-steel construction here, some nice shielded bearings, and it's not a terrible looking differential, again, for the money. Connecting those differentials to the wheels are CVDs in the front, and these look like fairly generic CVDs, though they do seem to be decent quality. Looks like we're missing a little bit of thread lock on this screw that goes into aluminum, though I have found when you're screwing through plastic, it's not nearly as important. We get this little cover off here, and we can see we've got a steel pinion gear here with a plastic spur gear. Pulling the rest of this cover off gives us a look at the slipper clutch, which appears to be metal with fiber friction material, basically like you'd expect. And we do have a decent looking sliding aluminum motor mount here. All right, let me get all this together, then we'll take a closer look at those electronics. So taking a closer look at these electronics, like I said, we've got that 10BL50 2-3S Hobbywing ESC. We've got a 3300 kV motor here. This motor is 50 millimeters in length and 36 millimeters in diameter. Underneath this little cover, we've got a splash-resistant 4-channel receiver, and to go along with that receiver, we've got a nice little remote. This is the same remote that FMS uses on a lot of their smaller trucks, and this is actually a very decent setup. It's small, but it feels good, and this is a full 4-channel remote, so you can put a light controller or other accessories on this car. There's a waterproof, standard-size servo on here, though I suspect you'd have to get a low-profile upgrade. I'm pretty sure this is going to be a plastic geared servo, and yes, you can see from the fact that this is a self-tapper that this is going to be a plastic gear servo, so definitely not the best servo in the world. But the crazy thing about this is this ESC is about 35 bucks online. You'd spend about 20 bucks on the motor. The transmitter and receiver is worth about $20. So if you bought this, ripped the electronics out, kept the tires, and threw the rest of it away, it would still be a pretty good deal, but you get a whole car for that price. Whether or not this thing's actually a good basher remains to be seen. Let me get this put together and let's go find out. All right, guys, let's see how fast she is on 2S. Got some pep. A little hard to control. There it is, full throttle. That's not too bad. Full throttle. Yeah, pretty good. Let's see how fast that is. All right, 28 miles an hour. That is really not that terrible for 2S. Let's see how it bashes. Well guys, that was surprisingly not bad. This included 2S battery, seems pretty strong, and whereas we were taking things fairly easy on 2S, I'd say it held up just fine, and 2S is probably the sweet spot for this truck. Speaking of that 2S battery, I wanted to take a look and see just how good this battery is, so let's put this on the LiPo dyno and see just how close to that 30C it gets. Now keep in mind, ESR isn't everything. Hello. And a low ESR does not necessarily mean that the battery is a good one, but a high ESR generally does mean it's not very good. And we can see here we've got a true 18C, which is going to give us about 95 amps, and that's going to be plenty for this 50 amp ESC. So it doesn't seem like this is too terrible of a battery. But on this channel, we don't take things to their limit, we take things beyond their limit. And if you like seeing things get torn down, then torn up, make sure you get subscribed. Let's go see what this thing can do on 3S. Well guys, that did not go as planned. I kind of thought this was just going to be a meme video where I showed you this truck and then told you about the electronics that you could use after it broke immediately. However, as you saw out there, we were bashing this thing like an $800 truck, not like an $80 truck, and we did eventually break it. Had a really bad landing from about 10 feet in the air and broke the hinge pin blocks. You can get an aluminum upgrade set for about $18 or a full set of stock ones with arms for about the same price. As you can see, we have bent the center brace. That's not a big deal. That would be fairly easy to bend back. I also torched one of these tires. That's completely my fault. I got some grass in there, didn't check it, and ended up melting the hex. Other than that, it's held up really well, and honestly, it drives pretty decently. And keep in mind, this truck's 85 bucks on eBay right now. You could buy this truck, take the tires, receiver and transmitter, ESC and motor out of it, throw the rest of the car away, and you'd still be ahead. I genuinely don't know how they make any money on this thing, and honestly, I'm pretty impressed with it. I think if you kept this on the stock 2S battery, didn't go crazy with it, you could have a lot of fun with a car like this. It actually handles okay. The shock tuning is pretty decent, and to be honest with you, it's more durable than some other cars I've reviewed recently that cost nearly 10 times as much. So what do you think about this? Have you had one of these? Do you want to get one now? Let me know down in the comments. Make sure you get subscribed, then check out one of these guys.